On this installment of Low Budget Binge, look for UFOs, a retirement from hell, stop motion madness, folksy rituals, a killer concerto, and the comedy stylings of Ruth Buzzy. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights, a part of the Kings of Horror Network. I'm ML Miller. While you might be watching this video on the Kings of Horror Network, I urge you to click over to my ML Miller Frights YouTube page and give it a like. Please share with all of your buddies. Click subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the paths less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, do-it-yourselves, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see in the usual Hollywood releases. I'll indicate in the review and down below where you can find these films, along with their trailers. Here we go. Volcanic UFO Mysteries is new on-demand and digital download from Uncorked Entertainment. It's directed and written by Darcy Weir. Darcy Weir, who helmed Sasquatch Among Wild Men, which I reviewed a while back, returns with a new hour-long doc about the connection between volcanic activity and UFOs. Weir interviews Stephen Bassett, a political activist on the disclosure of UFO evidence, as well as Latin American reporter Jaime Maussan, who has documented numerous sightings about this phenomenon and what it could mean. Along with Bigfoot, I want to believe that UFOs exist, and I feel that there's much more credible evidence of UFO existence than the big hairy guy. People are still going to scoff at the idea of UFOs, even though there's been so much evidence to the contrary. Even I thought it seems to be a bit of a stretch to connect UFOs with volcanoes, but after seeing the videos, it does seem like there's something there. It seems there's been a flurry of UFO activity around volcanoes in Latin America. The doc shows quite a few unexplained and unidentified objects hovering around, diving into, and bursting out of active volcanoes, as well as ones that are soon to become active. Theories abound about why they're there. Could they be using the volcanoes as some source of energy? Could the UFOs be activating these volcanoes? Or are they somehow dampening its effects? No one knows, but despite the questionable reasons behind the phenomenon, the videos don't lie. I immediately assumed we were going to see weird saucer-shaped objects bursting out among the lava from the volcanoes, misidentified as objects that are most likely debris. But the footage itself is quite compelling. It shows objects moving on their own path around the volcanoes, sometimes entering and exiting clouds of smoke and ash that would be too harsh for any man-made craft to survive. Yet it chugs right through. Bassett provides some interesting food for thought as to why the UFOs are being more prominent in recent years, touting the theory that we have consumed so much of the Earth and directed our societies so close to war with world-breaking weapons that other forces have been sent in to intervene. Bassett thinks they have come to warn us that we're veering towards extinction and have no choice but to intervene to save the world we live on. It's an interesting theory, not one that shows much faith in humanity, but who's to say it's true or not? It's hard not to agree that after seeing these videos that something wonky is going on. I don't know what it is, but I had fun watching these strange videos of even stranger objects lingering around those volcanoes. And while this documentary isn't going to solve the mystery, it does provide some compelling evidence. 10 Minutes to Midnight is new on demand and digital download from 1091 Pictures. It's directed by Erik Bloomquist and written by Erik Bloomquist and Carson Bloomquist. No, this isn't the Charles Bronson naked serial killer movie. This one's about Amy, played by Carolyn Williams, who rides through a brutal thunderstorm only to be bit by a bat on her way into a job as a late-night radio host. Little does she know that this is her last day, as a younger upstart, played by Nicole Kang, is replacing her after her last gig on her show, entitled 10 Minutes to Midnight, like the name of the movie. Amy doesn't take the news well and has a sort of mental break, begins seeing monsters, having hallucinations, and basically losing every last shred of her mind. I lost my job once. It hit me pretty hard. It's something I think that I am still processing and getting over. So there are moments in 10 Minutes to Midnight that really hit home for me. Carolyn Williams delivers a strong performance in a throwback role that is a semi-sequel to her turn as Stretch, the young late-night DJ final girl from Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Imagine if Stretch wasn't driven insane that night when she fought against the Sawyer clan and stayed in radio for all these years in between, and that's pretty much Amy in this film. Williams is convincing as the talented radio show host, who has seen her better days pass behind her, yet really isn't ready for retirement yet. Unfortunately, she doesn't really have a choice in the matter. 10 Minutes to Midnight does a great job of fleshing out the entire 7 stages of grief process, as Amy is shocked by the firing, refuses to believe it, attempts to bargain for it, bursts out in rage, falls into a depression, and eventually accepts her fate. All of this is compounded and placed through a horror lens, as Amy has suffered from a bat bite and may have rabies, or maybe she's becoming a vampire. The film reaches multiple conclusions, allowing the viewer the freedom to choose what Amy's fate truly is. This is a descent into madness tale above all else, and it's a good one at that. Williams and the filmmakers, Erik and Carson Bloomquist, really do a great job of making every step into the abyss nuanced and believable. Though the film does come in at just about an hour and some change, it still manages to sag a bit in the middle. There were a few repetitious scenes as Amy relives scenarios a few times as she trips away from sanity. Ultimately, I like the setup and the resolution, making the journey itself satisfying despite the redundancy. This seems to be a very personal and poignant story for the filmmakers and Williams. Through the years, Williams has stuck with the horror genre and really delivered some solid performances. I'm sure she will deliver many more, but this one feels like a powerful bookend to her career, nevertheless. You won't be able to predict the story of 10 Minutes to Midnight, and while it wears its low budget as a badge of honor, it still manages to tell a tragic and heartbreaking story of loss with some effective horror peppered in for good measure. The Village in the Woods is new on demand and digital download from 4 Digital Media. It's directed by Raine McCormack and written by John Hoernschemeyer and Raine McCormack. A couple out to make a quick buck hatch a scheme with a shady woman to pose as the long-lost owners of a pub called the Harbour Inn in a small town in the middle of the foggy English countryside. But upon arrival, Nikki, played by Beth Park, and Jason, played by Robert Vernon, meet some creepy old people who welcome them with open arms into their small community. Wearing a ring that used to belong to the original owners, Nikki is uncomfortable maintaining the ruse and wants to leave. But Jason, seeing an opportunity to make some money by opening the pub again, is tempted to stay. Meanwhile, strange things are happening right under Nikki and Jason's nose, but they're too distracted with arguing with one another to notice until it's too late. The Village in the Woods will have very familiar elements to those who have seen The Wicker Man, Midsummer, HBO Max's The Third Day, and Rosemary's Baby. It's quite obvious from the get-go what's going on, though plot requires Nikki and Jason to be oblivious to it until the last moment. There are all kinds of creepy signs that should alert the couple to leave immediately, such as people touching their hands for a bit too long, worry dolls hanging everywhere, and the giant wood pyre being built right outside of the pub steps. This makes for some solid atmosphere, what with the constant dismal fog rolling around everywhere, making all outdoor scenes feel like a Kim Carnes or Black Sabbath music video from the 80s. But it doesn't have the most surprising of plots. It's pretty much obvious from the minute the couple enter the pub what they're in store for. The performances are strong throughout. This is a cast with solid acting talent all around. The main problem of The Village in the Woods lies in its pacing. Because the big reveal is projected so early on, I found myself urging the movie to get on with it and have the bad guys show their cards. Eventually they do, but it takes entirely too long to do so. On top of that, the film is dreadfully anticlimactic. All of that weight in the final moments are sort of gleaned over and cut away from just when things were finally about to get horrifying. The ending is poetic, in a sense, but I didn't find the wait for it worth it. There's a lot of foreboding tension and rich atmosphere that makes Village in the Woods look and feel better than most low-budgeters. There's a sequence involving a goat-man satyr sort of creature that is nice and unsettling, as well as a scene where old people are having sex, which seems to be a must for these type of cultish movies these days. I found the plot to be lacking in surprises and cliched. If you're at all familiar with those small-town, with an evil secret horror films, I don't think you'll find much new in The Village in the Woods, despite the strong production values. The Wolf House is new streaming on SHUDDER. It's directed by Joaquín Cociña and Cristóbal León, and written by Cociña, León, and Alejandra Moffat. The Wolf House is a stop-motion claymation animated feature film that tells an allegory based on the true story of a Chilean colony that was taken over by a former Nazi and the atrocities that the children of the colony suffered afterwards. In the story, Maria, voiced by Alalia Kasai, is a young German girl who escapes the colony with two quote-unquote pigs and raises them to be her own in a house in the middle of the woods. Through some tender, loving care by Maria, the pigs turn into humans and the three live peacefully together with the wolf, voiced by Rainer Krauss, threatening them from outside of the house. But as the pigs grow, they begin to see Maria for who she really is, leading to a nightmarish and bleak finale. The Wolf House is an extremely art-housey art house film. Those who prefer their horrors to be literal shouldn't bother with it. But if you don't mind sifting through the minutiae, you'll find a horrifically resonant story mixing world history with the blackest of nightmares. The story is told broadly, and honestly, the only reason I was able to make sense of it was that I did some research on the film after watching it, so I'm no big brain here. Still, the story is absolutely messed up, and one that will make you lose a little faith in humanity if you choose to do a little research about the events that led up to this movie. Even if you don't want to do the homework, I recommend The Wolf House simply because it artistically blew my mind. The scene never stops morphing and evolving into new permutations. Not only are there grotesque and beautiful images to witness, but you get to see these images, sculptures, and blends of both constructed and deconstructed right there in front of you. You see the tape being used to create the forms of the characters. You see the paint stroke over the surface of these forms as they change from one shape to another. Even if the story loses you, if you appreciate art and how it's made, this film is an absolutely fascinating watch. Filled with images out of the most surreal and decrepit nightmares and paired with historical heft and tragedy, The Wolf House is going to be too heavy for some, too artsy for others. But if you don't mind a little depth and artistry in your viewing pleasure, and films that stretch the borders of what you're used to calling horror, The Wolf House is going to be a real treat for some of you. Reminiscent of the transfixing and terrifying stop-motion films of Jan Svankmajer, The Wolf House not only doles out unsettling images in droves, but it shows how those monsters are constructed from the ground up. It's a technical masterpiece for those who love to see how art is made. Welcome to the Blumhouse Nocturne was directed and written by Zu Quirke. I reviewed the first two Welcome to the Blumhouse installments when they were released last fall, and because Black Box and The Lie left me so cold, I really wasn't in any rush to check out the final two films released on Amazon Prime under the Welcome to the Blumhouse banner. After watching the Evil Eye trailer, I was left pretty uninterested at the low stakes and plot revelations from the trailer, but Nocturne seemed intriguing, so I checked it out, and surprisingly, I was left entertained. At least, much more than the first two lame efforts I reviewed a while back. If you're curious, you can check out a link to that review from Welcome to the Blumhouse, Black Box, and The Lie down below before the comments. Euphoria's Sydney Sweeney plays Juliet, fraternal twin of Vivian, played by Jumanji's Madison Iseman, who is somewhat envious of Vivian's success as a concert pianist. While Vivian is set to attend Juilliard in the fall, Juliet is yet to find a school interested in her. When a young violin soloist named Moira, played by Ji-Eun Hwang, leaps from her balcony to her death, it leaves a hole in the big spring performance, a hole Vivian feels she's a shoo-in to fill. But when Juliet finds Moira's old notebook filled with occult drawings and incantations, she finds her confidence and skill inexplicably growing, prompting her to compete with her sister for the lead soloist. Turns out Moira made a deal with dark forces in order to attain her musical achievements, which cost her her life. And Juliet looks to be following the same fateful path. Yes, if you've seen Suspiria, its remake, and Black Swan, you're not really going to be surprised with this Faustian tale of achieving dark desires for a price. In fact, this is an extremely predictable film if you've seen movies of this kind before. The beginning shows us Moira playing the violin and then committing suicide. As we find out Juliet is now following the same path as Moira, it's already played out what the eventual outcome most likely will be. Now the film could play off those expectations and end with something altogether different, but for the most part, we know a lot about what's about to happen before the lead character does. Because of this, in order to keep things interesting, other factors have to come into play. Luckily for Nocturne, there's a lot of this film that makes it worth sitting through despite the predictable plot. Sweeney is entrancing as Juliet. She's a fantastic young actress, able to convey sympathy even while she's being overcome with jealousy and strife towards her sister. Her heavy-lidded eyes are pretty fantastic at conveying a myriad of emotions without a word, and much of this film does a great job of shutting up and letting the actors' faces and the music speak volumes more than the script does. I'm looking forward to seeing more of Sweeney, as she really does elevate the material with her nuanced performance. I also loved how the magic is portrayed in Nocturne. It's not overly flashy or artsy, though there are some vivid dream sequences that are reminiscent of the bold colors of Argento's original Suspiria. For the most part, though, the magic is conveyed through some rough sketches in a notebook and the vivid way that the scenes of playing the music is portrayed. Cuts of Juliet being transported elsewhere to some kind of dream realm interspersed with her playing the piano are done marvelously well. I also love the way this film depicts the artist going into a sort of fugue state while getting into the flow of the music. All of it shows an understanding of how art and music works and adds to the passion Moira, Juliet, and Vivian feel for their work. Sure, I had an idea where this film was leading, but writer-director Zu Quirke manages to add some surprises along the way and even ends on a note that proves to be visually captivating nevertheless. Nocturne might be a very familiar story that follows the Faustian deal to a T, but with a compelling lead, a solid understanding of how art is made, and some measured yet creative uses of its treatment of magic and the occult made it much better than the rest of the films released in this Welcome to the Blumhouse series. If you're going to take a chance on any of these films from Blumhouse, Nocturne is the one to see. That'll be it for today. Please chime in down below in the comments and let me know how on the nose or mind-numbingly wrong I am, or you can counter with your own review. So guys, you know how YouTube works. I'd love to be able to dedicate more time to this channel. I'm not monetized yet, so if you want to help me out, remember to hit all the pertinent bells and whistles down below. Want some spooky comics to read? I have 2 new horror comic book trade paperbacks you should look out for. Both GRAVETRANCERS and Pirouette, collecting never-before-published issues, can be found in only the finest of comic book shops. If you're looking for written reviews, you can find them on my website, mlmillerwrites.com. If you really want to show your support, I also have a Patreon page at mlmiller. Look for the link to my Patreon page down below. Thank you so much for your time, and take care.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. You're doomed. Live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside that reality.